Cattle should be given adequate time to settle down in yards before they're loaded onto trucks. This is another factor in stress reduction. Before backgrounder cattle are trucked off to a feedlot, it's essential that they're ready for the journey. They could be in transit for some time, so feed and water will be important considerations before they go. The time that cattle are off feed and water is also important when it comes to induction. As soon as cattle arrive at the feedlot, they should be given access to fresh feed and clean water. Allowing cattle to drink before they travel, albeit not too close to departure time, is very important in ensuring they don't become dehydrated. Cattle going into a feedlot need to be in as good a condition as possible if they're going to achieve production goals. For this reason, it's essential that calm handling techniques are used when yarding, loading and unloading. Use of goads and electric prods should be kept to a minimum. The first step is having adequate facilities. Yards should be in good condition and checked regularly to ensure there are no hazards which could cause injuries. Once cattle are yarded, they should be given adequate time to settle down, for example overnight, before they're loaded. Weather conditions must also be considered before loading. If cattle are being moved in the hotter months of the year, plan the timing of operations to avoid the heat of the day. This is especially relevant if there's a long journey ahead. Once the journey begins, it's important that it's a direct trip to the feedlot with minimal stops or delays. Another key aspect of minimising stress and injury to cattle during transport is to ensure that accredited transport operators are used. ALRTA, Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association, or Truck Care accredited operators should be used. Truck Care is an independently audited quality assurance program for the Australian livestock transport industry. Use of accredited operators is the best way to ensure that transport operations are being carried out in a professional manner within accepted guidelines.
It's important when transporting any cattle that we both comply with all the legislative requirements around animal welfare, but also do what is important for the animal to make sure that it's comfortable and to make sure it arrives at the feedlot in the very best condition that it can. That quite often means that animals that are travelling a long way will be spelled en route. It also means that you need to manage the feed and water that they're provided prior to transport. And equally, you need to make sure that when they arrive, they then move straight back onto feed and water to rehydrate and get their rumen working well again. Over long transport times, the rumen can suffer, so it's important that these things are done as soon as the cattle arrive. One of the critical elements of maintaining Australia's position around the world as a reputable supplier of beef is maintaining an understanding of the animal right throughout its life and all things that have happened to that animal. And that comes with the paperwork that travels with them. It comes with ensuring that there is a quality system at all points in that chain. And one of the critical ones of those is the transport of those animals. So it's vital that an accredited transporter who deals with animals in the correct way, has the correct equipment, that will make sure that those animals arrive at a feedlot in a safe condition, in the right, all the correct welfare has been maintained, and then we've got an animal that is ready to perform in the feedlot.
We always bring our cattle in and curfew them overnight in the yards. We don't like to load cattle full. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help them travel well at all. We do probably suffer a slight loss in weight and that sort of thing. But it's better to load those cattle, yard them the night before and load them the next morning rather than try and yard up and load straight up out of the paddock of a morning. So we curfew all of our cattle overnight. We do give them dry feed. We give them a dry hay, just feed them on bales of dictator hay overnight. But we try and have those cattle sort of relatively emptied out before they load. We do get some long haul cattle. And trucks can't always get here, so we make sure that those drivers call us. They've got our numbers the whole time, so no matter what time cattle arrive, we're here to unload them, whether it be 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning. We make sure that someone's down here to receive those cattle. We do sort of try and stipulate between 6 and 6 in the daylight hours if possible, but there's always trouble on the road and that sort of thing. So we are prepared to take these cattle at any time rather than have trucks pull up on the side of the road all night and come in the next morning. We'd rather get those cattle here and get them off and get them out onto water and feed as soon as possible.
Cattle that's been educated properly and that travel a hell of a lot better. Cattle that not had the education what they should have. We do from time to time have troubles with them, loading, travelling and so forth, yeah. It all comes back on how the cattle, if they travelled, be weighed on the end of their destination as a weigh-in for them, or they go into a sale yards. And the seasonal conditions, like now, we'd like them if the cattle have been fed hay and on water, then the water turned off for a little while before they travel. So the cattle have got a little bit of strength and travel in them. But yeah, it all depends on if the cattle are going direct to works or going to abattoirs or feedlots or whatever. It all depends on the situation.
We do have a formal induction here. We go, the drivers are taken for a test drive and work through the crates, and for the first 2 or 3 weeks they will be put with other blokes we trust, worked around, see how they go, see what work they can handle, whether they're better suited to feedlot work or paddock work. If the cattle are not travelling, we'll spell the cattle, we'll pull them up, we'll communicate with the customer and see what works best for them and for the livestock and for our driver. Our drivers are given, on average, there's from load time to expected unload time, there's a window of about 18 hours to put 540 k's into. So there's no pressure on our fellows to get there. As far as their background cattle coming in, there is no deadline on them. If the cattle are not travelling, they're happy for us to pull them up, spell them. They're happy, they hang back, there could be 6 hours between the lead truck and the back truck. They're happy for that, as long as the cattle turn up.
Well, travel cattle and handled cattle and conditioned cattle, they should be able to do 18 to 24 hours travelled on a truck. Our drivers, and it comes back to common sense, the way the cattle are travelling, if the cattle are stressed or not stressed or travelling okay and everything else, and the conditions of the cattle and the season conditional. There's 2 phone calls. The first phone call is to operations, and the second phone call, operations or whoever is handling that client makes a contact with them and says we're having trouble with the stock travelling, or the stock are travelling well, and that decision's made from there. We always sort of allow room for cattle to travel, irrespective if they're drought affected or fat cattle going to slaughter. Yeah, you have to allow room to, if they need to sit down, they can hop back up again, and then they can get up on their own back. That's a big thing. If they've got room to lay down, if they need to get lay down, they need a little rest for a while, they can hop back up themselves.
Well, when the cattle are coming east, next week we've got cattle coming out of north of Blackall. They'll come down to here in a day, and we'll spell them here for 12 or 14 hours or 18 hours, whatever the case is. If the cattle are fit and able to travel to go through to Dinmore, we'll reload them after 6 hours. If the cattle don't look like they're going to travel, we'll spell them here for 12 or 18 hours. It's a case-by-case thing. You can load 20 decks off one place. 3 truckloads will travel, 2 truckloads won't travel. That's where we rely on our drivers to give us feedback. Once the cattle are loaded, they make a judgment call. Look, these cattle aren't travelling. They may not make it here. We may bring them to Roma and spell them there, or in as far as here and spell them here for a day. We've got the facilities here. We can handle 40 decks here on the ground, over a period of time, up to 3 or 4 days. We've got feed and water and troughs. The whole setup's here. As far as further west, Roma's always been a spelling complex. They're willing to spell cattle there. Blackall, Tambo are the same. I guess it all comes back to the contacts. Every other transport company's got the same contacts. We're just a little bit more lucky in that we can bring the cattle right here to the end of the road train route and have the luxury of spelling them here if we have to.
There's more and more professional people coming into the industry now and working it. The handling their cattle, calmer and everything else is more profitable for them.